Psychedelic enthusiasts around the internet are happy to see that LSD is becoming more mainstream. Websites like the antimedia.org, all the way down to Business Insider, are talking about microdosing. And microdosing is this idea that a little bit of acid or LSD or mushrooms can help you do better at your job. And everything started with an interview at Rolling Stones made by Andrew Leonard to a 25-year-old kid that lives in Silicon Valley, Nik.
Okay.
And his idea was like, dude, we drop, a tenth of a dose of acid, and we are able to have more insight. We have this kick of energy. We don't crash like on some prescription drugs, and we are able to change the perception. Again, we think about the doors of perception. Aldous Huxley saying, if you look at things differently, then you can bring a change. What do you think?
I mean, on the surface, what we're talking about here is giving drugs, hard drugs, hallucinogens to your employees. But if you kind of, take a second and think about it, it's actually a pretty cool idea. We're not talking about getting these people super high, microdoses a little bit, just to give you that different point of view, right? To see things from an alternative angle. I think it's good. I don't see anything wrong with it. The only thing I would be concerned potentially is that it is very illegal still. But also, what are the health effects of taking small doses, not once or twice, but if you're doing it consistently, that might add up maybe eventually, right? Yeah,
one of the problems of these drugs, of the psychedelics, is that there's very little research done so far because they've always been illegal. There's always been, since the counterculture of the 60s, they've always been pushed away because they were a tool of enlightenment for many at the time to see things differently and to think of a different future. And obviously the establishment didn't like that. So for the last 40 years, or maybe 50 years, the attitude of the society, towards LSD have been shifting. Now we have research, public research done in different countries around the world. The US is trying to dabble a little bit into research, but we know that many in Silicon Valley, they swear by this. Everything began back in 2011. James Fadiman, the author of the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, one of the quintessential books for those who enjoy the psychedelic experience, he brought the term microdosing to the public discourse, and from then on, the inquiries about it and the testament about it has been growing, specifically in the Silicon Valley area. And we know how they like to go to the Burning Man and have the psychedelic experience because they're trying to reinvent. The whole point is we are trying to disrupt society as it is, and we need a new point of view. So now you mentioned, is it dangerous? Now, what we know is that before, James Fadiman, he did back in the 60s a research on 27 different individuals on microdosing. And he said, what we saw is that it goes both ways to begin with. In such a small pool, it's hard to come with a definite answer. But he said, for some, it was a disaster. They trip out, they had a bad trip, they couldn't perform their jobs. But for others, they came up with new solutions for problems in construction, a new way to visualize protons. And I mean, we're talking about a big arena and a big umbrella of different people that were in this research, from carpenters to mechanics to scientists, that all voluntarily involved in this 60s experiment to see if microdosing was actually a good thing for them. Now we know that the Silicon Valley crowd, they're young, 25, 27 years old in average, that want to have an edge, they want to code, that they don't want to go the pharmaceutical route, because as we know, many of the coders in Silicon Valley resort to Adderall and other amphetamine-based products to have an edge. Some are saying, you know what, I think I'm going to go into a soulful, more enlightening route, and I'm going to use psychedelics.
Right, and I think it's great. I mean, look at someone like Steve Jobs, for example. We know he dropped acid back in the 70s. Now, I'm not saying he did acid once and was like, oh, iPod Nano, I'm going to make it. iPhone. No, but, there is a correlation there, and I think, it might work. It might not work for everyone, it might not work for a carpenter, it might work for someone else, but I think overall it's a good idea and it expands your mind, and if you do it without abusing the drug, I think it can really have a lot more effects than it does drawbacks.
Yeah, I mean, one of his famous phrases was think differently, coming from the idea of look at things different. But again, we have to also talk about the minimum sentencing guidelines for this type of drugs. If you get caught having these drugs, we're talking about 20, 25 or more years that you will go behind bars. Jeez. So it's not a risk that many will be willing to take. Distributing this drug is very, very dangerous, is highly criminal. And still, we see that a bunch of kids and people around the country are trying to get an edge by dropping mini dosage of LSD to try to get an edge at their jobs. This is crazy. What do you think?